The morning rush at the station was Daniel's chaos, juggling Iris and racing the clock. He collided with a woman in a hoodie and baseball cap. Her purse scattered, documents flying across the floor. The crowd stepped right over the mess, but Daniel dropped to his knees, collecting every slip and asking if she was okay. Her voice was a whisper. "Thank you. I'm bothering you again." Daniel smiled. "It's nothing. I'm here every morning. Let me know if you need help." She froze at the word morning. As Daniel turned to leave, she blurted out, her voice trembling. "You forgot me. Again?" Daniel stopped, turning back, utterly confused. The woman pulled her cap lower, her eyes troubled. "We've met more often than you think." Daniel Ross, 35, was a master of controlled chaos. He lived with his 6-year-old daughter, Iris, in a small rented apartment near the train station, a dwelling that felt less like a home and more like a permanent starting line. Every single morning was a race, prepping Iris's school lunch, checking her homework, and just barely clocking in on time at the small engine repair shop where he worked. 3 years ago, he lost his wife, Clara, in a tragic accident. Since then, Daniel had filled the roles of both mother and father, his heart aching but resilient. He maintained a gentle spirit and a deep commitment to kindness, a core value he taught his daughter daily. "We might not be rich, Iris, but we must always be good." Daniel wore his wedding ring on a leather chain beneath his shirt, a constant physical reminder of Clara's unwavering belief that kindness was the only true wealth. The path to the train station had become a ritualistic stage for his quiet decency. Daniel was the man who always paused. He helped the elderly with heavy bags, assisted a pregnant woman struggling with a suitcase, or simply tracked down a dropped phone for a frantic tourist. It was so constant that some of the morning commuters had affectionately, or perhaps ironically, nicknamed him the station's good guy. He never sought thanks. He simply acted. Recently, his routine included the unyielding presence of a mysterious woman. She was consistently dressed in an oversized hoodie, her face obscured by a low-pulled baseball cap, eyes almost always cast toward the ground. She kept a distinct distance, yet Daniel often caught a flicker of her gaze, a glance that felt less like a stranger's fleeting look and more like observation. Elise Varden, under her disguise, wasn't just observing him. She was studying him. In her high-stakes corporate life, every interaction was transactional. Daniel's pure, unsuspicious help was a phenomenon she needed to prove was real. He'd seen her struggle several times, fumbling papers, a collapsing backpack, or a cell phone constantly slipping from her grasp. Without thinking, Daniel would always step in to help, his actions automatic, rooted in habit. Iris, sharp and perceptive, noticed the recurring figure. "Daddy, why is that lady always sad?" she would ask, tugging on his jacket. Daniel would offer a standard, gentle reply, shielding his daughter from adult sadness. "Everyone has their own worries, sweetie." One particularly heavy morning rain turned the station into a slick, miserable tunnel. Daniel saw the woman, her shoulders hunched, clearly shivering despite the hoodie. He instinctively shrugged off his own jacket and held it over her head, providing a small, dry shelter for just a few seconds. She flinched, a shiver running through her that wasn't entirely from the cold. When his hand briefly rested on her shoulder to steady the coat, she stiffened, a reaction that struck Daniel as strangely familiar, like a muscle memory from a long-forgotten past. Iris, however, was undeterred by the woman's distant demeanor. The girl, a small, bright light, loved greeting her. "You dropped something again, miss," Iris once called out, causing the woman to stop, and for the first time, offer a small, genuine laugh. The familiarity grew, yet Daniel remained blissfully unaware of the intense scrutiny he was under. The woman watched him meticulously, the way he fixed Iris's crooked collar, the ease with which he helped others without waiting for a thank you, the quiet endurance he displayed when jostled or ignored by rude commuters. He was an anomaly in the relentless city rush. Then came the morning that broke the routine. Iris, running ahead, tripped violently, stumbling towards the edge of the platform. Before Daniel could even lunge forward, the hooded woman moved like lightning, covering the distance in a blur. She threw herself down, catching Iris barely a foot from the railway edge, wrapping the child in a protective embrace. In that high-stakes moment, her hands were trembling, clutching Iris with a desperation that spoke of a deep, perhaps painful, distant memory. Daniel rushed over, his heart hammering against his ribs, thanking her profusely, unable to stop the torrent of gratitude. She pulled her cap low, her voice strained. "Stop thanking me, Daniel. You've helped me so much already." Her use of his first name, coupled with her earlier haunting question, "You forgot me, didn't you?" echoed in Daniel's mind. He began to realize her appearances weren't random, that this mystery woman wasn't just another person he helped. The first act closed on a tangible clue. While pulling out her drawing book, Iris noticed a small folded piece of paper caught in the zipper of the woman's backpack. It wasn't litter. It was a fragment of stationery bearing a small, exquisitely watermarked logo of a massive global conglomerate, a symbol usually reserved only for the highest tier of executive leadership. The dynamic at the station shifted dramatically. It began subtly when a group of well-dressed corporate employees, the kind who considered the early train merely a means to an end, started to recognize the mysterious woman. They pointed, whispering conspiratorially among themselves. The subject of their hushed chatter was the sudden, high-profile disappearance of a titan of industry, Elise Varden. "She looks exactly like CEO Elise Varden," one whispered, confirming the shared suspicion. "The one who vanished from the media 3 weeks ago." The rumor spread with the toxic speed of a digital notification. "It can't be. Why would a CEO ride the subway looking like that?" But the sheer curiosity, the need to confirm the absurd, drew countless eyes toward her every single morning. The whispers quickly escalated into open hostility. A group of young analysts began making cruel daily bets on when Daniel would finally lose his patience and stop helping the impoverished CEO. They would accidentally jostle his coffee or trip him, testing the limits of his kindness. Elise Varden, for it was indeed her, heard every caustic whisper, every speculative judgment. She pulled her baseball cap lower, seeking refuge in the shadow of the brim. She knew with chilling certainty that the moment her identity was exposed, the rare, fragile piece she had found on the commuter train would instantly shatter. She wasn't hiding from the public. She was hiding from the person she had become. The tension broke one day when a particularly arrogant female employee, observing Daniel helping Elise pick up a dropped glove, made a snide comment, loud enough for the entire platform to hear. "Be careful not to let her poverty rub off on you. Did you think a CEO would ever actually talk to someone like you? Look at yourself." The implication was clear. Daniel's worn clothes and honest work disqualified him from any association with the rich, even the disguised rich. Daniel, his expression unruffled, simply offered a small, dismissive smile and subtly positioned himself to shield Elise, preventing her from becoming the center of any more unwanted attention. But Elise heard it all. Every word landed like a direct, personal assault. Her heart seized with a sharp, unexpected pang when she saw Daniel being dismissed and scorned purely because of his modest, unassuming appearance. This judgment was far more cruel than any she had ever received in the boardroom. The hostility intensified another morning when a commuter loudly scoffed at Daniel's ancient motorcycle parked outside the station, calling it scrap metal on two wheels. Daniel, accustomed to such sneers, simply shrugged and walked on. Elise, witnessing the unnecessary venom, felt a cold rage bubble up. Her fists clenched inside her hoodie pockets, and she took a decisive half-step forward, ready to unleash a CEO-level verbal annihilation that would silence the offender permanently. Yet Daniel's utter lack of reaction, his pure, unshakable calm, stopped her. He never defended himself. He only defended others. That profound observation deepened her respect, solidifying her resolve to remain hidden for his sake. On another morning, Elise's aging, bulky phone, a relic she deliberately carried to appear inconspicuous, slipped from her grip. It clattered loudly on the concrete. A male employee, fast and condescending, snatched it up before Elise could react. He held it high, a cruel smirk twisting his mouth. "Whose old junk is this? Only poor people carry phones this pathetic." Daniel didn't hesitate. He moved with a quiet, certain authority. He retrieved the phone calmly, placing it firmly back into Elise's hands, his body a solid barrier between her and the jeering crowd. His voice, though low, carried a resonant truth that silenced the platform for a breath. "No one is poor for using old things," he stated, his gaze meeting the employees with steady firmness. "You are only poor when you lack respect for others." The crowd fell silent for a few awkward seconds, but the mockery quickly resumed, though quieter this time. Elise stood with her head bowed, feeling a confusing mix of profound gratitude and helpless shame. Iris, oblivious to the social warfare, tugged on Elise's sleeve, offering her innocent comfort. "Don't be sad, miss. My daddy says you are very strong." The simple, earnest statement from a child, offered without expectation or judgment, was so genuinely felt that it brought Elise to the verge of tears. The strange situation escalated further when an aggressive, self-important commuter stepped directly toward Elise. "Hey girl, you look familiar. Are you skipping work or running from some company?" he demanded, emboldened by the gathering crowd. Fearing imminent exposure, Elise instinctively stepped back, only to trip over Iris's small backpack. Instantly, Daniel stepped in front of her, his stance protective. His voice was steady and resolute. "She does not need to answer you," he asserted, meeting the man's aggressive posture with unflinching calm. The commotion reached a fever pitch. Commuters began pulling out their phones, starting to film the unfolding confrontation, sensing a dramatic public meltdown. Elise was trembling, overwhelmed by the terror of her carefully constructed anonymity being stripped away. Daniel gently took Elise's arm and guided her and Iris away from the swirling vortex of people, toward a quieter spot near the emergency exit. He had never seen her so paralyzed by fear. He hadn't yet grasped why she was terrified, but his instinct to protect her was absolute. The second act ended with a telling gesture. As Daniel steered her away, Elise managed to slip a small, elegantly wrapped box of expensive imported chocolate into Iris's backpack. Tucked beneath the ribbon was a tiny, handwritten note, the script softer and more vulnerable than any corporate signature. It read, "Thank you for letting me feel seen, my little friend." The morning of the reveal felt heavy, charged with an almost electrical anticipation. It wasn't the usual rush, it was the quiet before a storm. Suddenly, a motorcade of sleek, black luxury sedans, vehicles far too expensive and imposing for this small, working-class station, slammed to a halt right outside the entrance. The sight drew immediate, stunned silence. Following swiftly, a horde of reporters, cameras flashing wildly, descended upon the platform. They were led by a team of stone-faced security guards, all searching for one specific person. A woman who had been missing from the executive office for 3 agonizing weeks. The small station erupted into pandemonium. Commuters screamed, pushing and shoving to get a better look at the spectacle. In the chaotic surge, a sudden, powerful gust of wind, intensified by the motion of the crowd, tore the baseball cap clean off Elise's head. The hat tumbled across the grimy floor. And in that moment, under the harsh, fluorescent lights of the station, everyone stood utterly frozen. The crowd, the reporters, the security detail, all of them stopped, their movements suspended in disbelief. Her hair, usually tightly bound and hidden, cascaded down her shoulders. Her face, devoid of the concealing shadow, was unmistakable. It was Elise Varden, the notoriously icy CEO, the billionaire titan of global industry, the woman whose face had graced the cover of Forbes magazine just months prior, now standing on a train platform, dressed in a faded hoodie. The silence was deafening, a vacuum where sound had just been. It was violently shattered by a commuter's high-pitched scream. "It's the CEO! It's really her! I knew it! Oh God, I just laughed at her!" The realization hit the crowd with visceral force. They had witnessed a powerful drama unfold every day, completely unaware. Daniel, too, was stunned, his world tilting on its axis. But he didn't retreat. He didn't take a single step back. He looked past the expensive clothes of the newly arrived corporate entourage and focused solely on Elise. What he saw in her eyes wasn't the arrogant pride of a billionaire, but the raw, unadulterated fear of being dragged back to a life she was desperately trying to escape. A man in an exquisitely tailored suit, clearly a high-ranking executive or manager, shoved past the security guards, his face crimson with fury and panic. He lunged toward Elise, his voice shrill and laced with 3 weeks of accumulated stress. "Do you realize how many critical meetings you've missed? How many deals are hanging by a thread? The company is collapsing, Varden. What were you doing? Hiding out and slumming it with a man like this?" His contemptuous gaze swept over Daniel, dismissing him as an insignificant piece of station furniture. The entire platform swiveled, focusing their collective, judging stare onto Daniel. In an act of pure, fearless loyalty, Iris stepped forward, planting her small feet directly in front of Elise. She clutched the CEO's hand and shouted up at the enraged manager, her small voice shaking but firm. "Don't yell at her!" Infuriated by the child's interference, the manager roughly swiped Iris aside. The little girl stumbled, narrowly avoiding a fall into the tracks again. Daniel moved instantly, catching his daughter, his eyes going dark, the protective fury of a father finally reaching its breaking point. But before Daniel could speak, Elise exploded. The raw, authoritative voice that managed a multi-billion-dollar empire, a voice that had been silenced for 3 weeks, finally broke through. "Do not touch that child!" The air itself seemed to crackle. The powerful, absolute command froze the manager mid-step and silenced the entire teeming crowd. Elise took a deliberate step away from her corporate chaos, her eyes blazing with an unprecedented, terrifying conviction. She looked straight at the manager, the man who represented everything she had run from. "I ran," she stated, her voice now dangerously calm, carrying across the stunned platform. "I ran because I couldn't breathe in the company I built. I disappeared because, for the first time in years, I was treated like a human being by the man you just looked down on." She then turned slowly toward Daniel, her eyes red, trembling on the verge of tears. "He helped me every single morning," she whispered, her voice cracking with profound emotion. "He never knew who I was. He shielded me from the rain. He never asked for my name. He never asked for my money. He is the first person in years who made me feel safe." The statement choked the entire audience. The aggressive manager stood paralyzed, his fury draining away, replaced by shock and shame under the glare of dozens of recording phones. The media, sensing the story of a lifetime, captured every single word. The confrontation, the raw vulnerability, the stunning choice. The video would go viral within hours. Elise looked directly into Daniel's eyes and spoke the words that silenced the world around them. "You didn't forget me, Daniel," she said, her voice now steady. "You simply didn't know who I used to be, and I pray you never change." Daniel said nothing. Words were unnecessary. The depth of his gaze, calm, honest, and utterly free of judgment or awe, told Elise that her true identity didn't frighten him, didn't change his perception one bit. The third act culminated with a public declaration. With her past life, the security detail, the manager, the reporters, waiting behind her, Elise turned her back on the luxury motorcade. She took a single, deliberate step toward Daniel, sealing her choice in the eyes of the world. In the wake of the station's CEO video that had shocked global finance and warmed millions of hearts, Elise Varden took an unprecedented formal leave of absence from active corporate management. She didn't disappear this time. She simply exchanged one world for another. She began spending her mornings not on the train, but at Daniel's humble engine repair shop. She would arrive, often walking, carrying a small paper bag containing lunch, usually something simple and hearty that she had actually made herself, for both Daniel and Iris. The shop's mechanics and staff were initially dumbfounded. "Is that the real CEO Varden here? Really?" they whispered, their eyes wide. Elise, however, paid them no mind. She was utterly unconcerned with her public profile. All she wanted was to be close to this simple, honest life, a life where her value was based on her character, not her balance sheet. Iris, naturally, was delighted. She quickly grew inseparable from Elise, affectionately dubbing her Miss Elise of the Chocolate. While Daniel worked on temperamental car engines, Elise would settle in a quiet, dusty corner of the shop, reading storybooks to the little girl. On long, quiet afternoons, Iris would sometimes drift off, her head resting trustingly on Elise's shoulder. And occasionally, Elise herself, exhausted by the sheer lack of corporate tension, would fall asleep, finding brief, peaceful rest nestled close to Daniel's warmth. Elise began the slow, humbling process of learning the small, domestic arts she had never needed as a mogul. She learned to prepare simple meals without a private chef. She managed to awkwardly sew a button back onto Daniel's shirt. She spent hours with Iris, playing innocent games of guessing shapes and drawing pictures. Every single task was a victory over the sterile, high-pressure isolation of her former life. One quiet evening, the three of them were huddled in the tiny apartment kitchen, sharing bowls of instant ramen noodles. The meal was cheap, unassuming, and utterly perfect. Elise looked down at her bowl, then around the cramped but cozy space. "I've never had a dinner like this," she confessed, her voice soft with revelation. Daniel offered a gentle, profound reply. "It's simple, Elise, but it's real." Elise looked up, her gaze falling upon a brightly colored, slightly crumpled sheet of paper taped to the refrigerator. It was Iris's latest drawing, a stick figure of a man, a woman, and a little girl, all standing side by side beneath a huge, smiling sun. It was in this moment of quiet domesticity that Iris, with the fearless honesty only a child possesses, posed the question that hung unspoken between the adults. "Miss Elise," she asked, tilting her head, "do you want to stay with my daddy and me?" Elise blushed, a deep, immediate crimson of embarrassment and hope. She looked at Daniel, utterly flustered by the directness. Daniel simply laughed, a warm, reassuring sound. "Kids say the darndest things," he said, trying to smooth over the moment. Elise didn't let him. She turned back to Iris, and then her eyes returning to Daniel, she gave an answer that was barely a breath, yet heavier than any merger agreement. If you two don't mind the trouble." The atmosphere thickened, not with anxiety, but with warm, undeniable hope. It was a silent, unhurried, yet deeply felt acceptance. It felt profoundly like a family. Elise's eyes drifted to the tiny, overgrown patch of earth behind the apartment, a small, humble garden where Daniel used to plant his late wife's favorite flowers. She looked at the soil, then at Daniel, asking quietly if she might plant a new sapling there. Daniel's answer, a true mark of acceptance and moving on, sealed their bond. "If it's yours, Elise, it will thrive here." Act 4 concluded with the tangible image of Elise Varden, the former CEO, kneeling down. Her hands were covered in dark, honest soil as she planted a small, fragile purple flower bud, a deliberate symbolic act of rooting herself, of planting a new life that was truly her own. The morning of the decisive board meeting arrived, bringing with it a chilling echo of her past life. Elise had to return, one last time, to the towering headquarters of Varden Global. Daniel and Iris wished her luck, but Elise walked away with a heavy heart, leaving the warm comfort of the small apartment for the cold glass and steel of her empire. In the sterile, mahogany-paneled boardroom, the environment was overtly hostile. The majority of the shareholders in the executive committee, the people who valued profit over sanity, were waiting. They immediately pressured Elise to sign a document that would significantly restrict her own power, arguing that her 3-week disappearance was an act of gross irresponsibility that necessitated a vote of no confidence. Elise stared at the page, the pen heavy and cold in her hand. For a long, silent moment, she saw not the complex legal clauses, but a succession of images. Daniel's protective arm in the rain, Iris's small hand clutching her sleeve, the steam rising from the cheap, hot ramen, and the dark, welcoming soil where the purple flower was beginning to take root. She lowered the pen, but she did not sign. Elise stood up, her movement slow but commanding, drawing all eyes in the room. Her voice was strong, carrying the weight of a monumental, irreversible decision. "I have made my choice," she announced, her gaze sweeping over the astonished faces of the board members. "If I must choose between a company that suffocated me and a family I never had, I choose family." She didn't wait for the ensuing shouts and chaos. She simply turned and walked out of the boardroom. She left behind the billions, the power, the responsibility, the guards, and the security detail. She carried only the jacket Daniel had given her. Elise returned to the familiar sight of the small, rented apartment. Daniel was sitting at the worn kitchen table, patiently helping Iris with her multiplication homework. The scent of engine oil and pencil shavings hung gently in the air. She paused in the doorway, taking a deep, ragged breath, releasing every trace of the corporate pressure. "I came back to the place," she whispered, her voice thick with relief, "where I finally belong." Daniel looked up from Iris's workbook, his eyes meeting hers, calm, knowing, and endlessly kind. He gave her the answer her heart had been waiting for, the only response that truly mattered. "You're back?" he said, a gentle smile spreading across his face. "Welcome home, Elise." Elise finally broke. Tears streamed down her face, tears of relief and true joy. She rushed forward, embracing Daniel. Iris, abandoning her homework, scrambled out of her chair and threw her arms around both of them, completing the circle. The story culminated in a tranquil, perfect morning. The three of them sat together, sharing toast and jam at the small kitchen table. Sunlight streamed through the window, falling directly onto the small patch of garden outside. The fragile purple flower bud, planted only days before, had opened, a single, resilient bloom, confirming that Elise had indeed found her true home. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told, leave a comment and subscribe to NL Touching Stories.